What if I told you that Judas Iscariot, the man forever remembered as the greatest betrayer in history, might not be as one-dimensional as we think? Here's a little-known fact. Judas wasn't the only disciple entrusted with handling money, but he may have had a unique role in funding Jesus' ministry. Some theologians suggest that Judas, like many Jews of his time, expected Jesus to establish an earthly kingdom, one that required financial preparation for rebellion against Roman rule. If true, this detail could reshape how we interpret his actions. Was he merely a traitor, or a man disillusioned by a mission he couldn't understand? Let's peel back the layers of Judas's story. Today, we'll view the betrayal from his perspective, examining his inner struggles, choices, and ultimate downfall. But before we dive in, a quick question for you. Have you ever wondered what might have been going through Judas's mind as he kissed Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? If you're as fascinated by untold stories in the Bible as we are, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community. Your curiosity fuels our mission to uncover these remarkable narratives. Judas's betrayal is often viewed in black and white, but the reality is far more complex. He was a man who walked with Jesus, witnessed miracles, and still chose to hand him over for 30 pieces of silver. But why? Was it greed, fear, or something else entirely? Some scholars argue that Judas believed his actions might even force Jesus to take decisive action as the Messiah, while others see his actions as a desperate grasp at understanding a plan that defied human logic. In this video, we'll step into Judas's shoes and explore his story as never before. Prepare yourself for a deep dive into one of the Bible's most infamous figures, a journey that will challenge what you've always believed and spark a conversation about faith, choices, and redemption. Judas Iscariot. The name is synonymous with betrayal, but who was he before that fateful act? Judas wasn't just a random follower of Jesus. He was chosen as one of the 12 disciples, a man trusted with responsibilities that indicated his importance. Among these was his role as the group's treasurer, managing their funds as they traveled to preach, heal, and spread the gospel. This position wasn't trivial. It was a testament to the trust Jesus placed in Judas, despite what would later unfold. Born in Kerioth, a town in Judea, Judas stood out among the disciples as the only non-Galilean. This fact alone might have shaped his perspective. While the others shared common hometowns and regional experiences, Judas's upbringing likely gave him a unique lens through which he viewed Jesus' mission. Did this outsider status make him feel disconnected from the group, or did it fuel a desire to prove his loyalty? Judas joined Jesus at a time of hope and fervor. Many Jews believed the Messiah would lead a revolt against Roman oppression, restoring Israel's glory. As someone managing their finances, Judas might have seen himself as part of a revolutionary's movement, preparing for an earthly kingdom rather than a spiritual one. When Jesus spoke of love and sacrifice, did Judas quietly yearn for a different outcome? Perhaps his loyalty began to waver, not because of greed or malice, but due to disillusionment. The seeds of betrayal are often sown in the soil of unmet expectations. Judas had seen miracles, the feeding of thousands, the raising of the dead, yet he struggled to align these wonders with the reality of Roman dominance. How could a man capable of such divine acts refuse to challenge their oppressors directly? Did Judas's doubts grow in secret, unspoken among the disciples? Or did he begin to question whether he truly understood Jesus' mission at all? It's easy to paint Judas as the villain, but history rarely offers such simple narratives. His story invites us to ask uncomfortable questions. Can doubt coexist with faith? Can betrayal stem from confusion rather than malice? Judas wasn't a nameless figure. He was a man with hopes, fears, and flaws, just like the rest of us. Before he became the betrayer, he was a disciple, a man chosen for a purpose even he might not have fully grasped. The night of the betrayal is one of the most haunting scenes in the Gospels. Judas, a man who had shared countless meals with Jesus, now approached him under the shroud of night. But what led him to that moment? Was it cold calculation or an act of desperation? The Gospels recount that Judas arranged to betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave in ancient Israel. Many interpret this as sheer greed, but could there be more to the story? Some scholars suggest that Judas might have been disillusioned with Jesus' refusal to act as the political Messiah he had hoped for. This frustration, combined with fear and confusion, may have pushed him to force Jesus' hand. By delivering him to the authorities, Judas might have believed that Jesus would finally reveal his divine power and establish his kingdom. But what was Judas feeling as he kissed Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? Was there guilt? Regret? Did he hesitate as he saw the sadness in Jesus' eyes? The kiss wasn't just a signal for the soldiers. It was an intimate gesture, a mark of affection between friends. To use it as a symbol of betrayal made the act even more personal and painful. The scriptures reveal that Jesus knew what Judas would do. In fact, at the Last Supper, he openly acknowledged that one of the disciples would betray him. Imagine the tension at that moment. Judas sitting among the group, knowing the truth but saying nothing. When Jesus said, "What you are about to do quickly," was Judas struck by shame, or was he resolute in his decision? These questions highlight the complexity of his character. Even in his darkest hour, Judas wasn't met with anger or hatred from Jesus. Instead, Jesus addressed him as friend. This word, spoken at the moment of betrayal, carries profound significance. Did Judas understand the depth of Jesus' love for him, even as he handed him over to his enemies? Or was his mind already consumed by the weight of his actions? This pivotal moment forces us to reflect on the human condition. How often do we betray our own values, our own faith, in moments of fear or doubt? Judas's kiss wasn't just an act of treachery. It was a mirror reflecting the struggles and contradictions that live within all of us. The betrayal was done. Judas Iscariot had handed Jesus over to the authorities, but what happened next reveals the weight of his actions. According to the Gospel of Matthew, Judas was overcome with remorse almost immediately after realizing the full consequences of his choice. He returned to the chief priests and elders, clutching the infamous 30 pieces of silver, and declared, "I have sinned, for I have betrayed innocent blood." But his confession fell on deaf ears. The religious leaders dismissed his guilt with cold indifference. What is that to us? That's your responsibility. This rejection might have deepened Judas's despair. He had not only betrayed his teacher and friend, but now found himself utterly alone, abandoned by those who had used him to achieve their own goals. It's a chilling reminder of how people can be discarded once they're no longer useful. In a desperate act, Judas hurled the silver coins into the temple. The very money that had seemed so valuable now felt like a curse in his hands. He couldn't undo what he had done, and the weight of his guilt drove him to a tragic end. Judas hanged himself, a grim conclusion to a life marked by regret and internal conflict. His death, while tragic, underscores the consuming nature of guilt when forgiveness feels out of reach. But even in his death, Judas remained a subject of debate. The priests, reluctant to use the blood money for temple purposes, decided to purchase a field with it, which later became known as the Field of Blood. This small detail, often overlooked, shows how deeply Judas's actions left a mark on those around him, staining not only his name, but also the instruments of his betrayal. The shadow of his choices extended far beyond his own life. Yet the story of Judas doesn't end there. Many wonder how the other disciples must have felt about him. Did they grieve for the man they once considered a brother, Or did his betrayal forever overshadow their memories of him? Some accounts hint that Judas's role in the group may have been more complex than we realize. He wasn't just an outsider or a villain. He was part of the inner circle. His betrayal was a profound shock, not just to Jesus, but to everyone who trusted him. Judas's aftermath isn't just about his own despair. It's a reminder of how guilt, isolation, and regret can consume a person. His story invites us to think about the choices we make, the pressures we face, and the grace we seek when we stumble. What would have happened if Judas had sought forgiveness instead of ending his life? Could grace have reached even him? Judas Iscariot's story raises one of the most debated theological questions. Was there room for redemption, even for him? Or was he eternally condemned for betraying the Son of God? The Bible provides glimpses of Judas's remorse, but his fate remains a topic of speculation and mystery. The Gospels emphasize Judas's deep regret after betraying Jesus. He confessed his sin to the religious leaders, returned the blood money, and, in despair, took his own life. Yet, unlike Peter, who also failed Jesus by denying him 3 times, Judas did not seek forgiveness from the one person who could grant it. Did Judas feel his sin was too great to be forgiven? Or did he underestimate the boundless mercy that Jesus had shown even to those society deemed unredeemable? Theologically, Judas's actions fulfilled prophecy, making his role essential to the divine plan of salvation. But this raises an uncomfortable question. If Judas's betrayal was predestined, was he truly culpable? Some scholars suggest that Judas's story mirrors the tension between free will and divine foreknowledge, a paradox that challenges even seasoned theologians. In Dante's Inferno, Judas is placed in the lowest circle of hell, reserved for the worst betrayers. This depiction has shaped much of Western thought about his fate. But what if his story is not about eternal condemnation, but about the tragic consequences of despair? In the Gospel of John, Jesus describes Judas as doomed to destruction, which many interpret as definitive. Yet, others argue this reflects Judas's earthly downfall rather than his eternal fate. Could Judas have misunderstood Jesus' mission entirely? Some believe Judas acted to accelerate Jesus' rise as the Messiah. This interpretation doesn't absolve Judas of guilt, but paints him as a deeply flawed, misguided figure, rather than purely malicious. If true, it adds layers to his character, leaving room for reflection rather than condemnation. Judas's despair may have been his ultimate undoing. What would have happened if he had sought reconciliation instead of succumbing to guilt? Could the same grace extended to others have reached him? His story forces us to consider profound truths about sin, guilt, and forgiveness. Ultimately, we are reminded that even in moments of despair, grace may still be within reach if we only turn toward it. Judas Iscariot's story is one of betrayal, regret, and unanswered questions. Viewed through his perspective, his actions take on a complexity that challenges the simple labels of traitor or villain. He was a man who walked alongside Jesus, witnessed miracles, and still stumbled into a tragic fate. Yet, his story isn't just about his failure. It's a mirror reflecting the struggles, doubts, and guilt we all face at times. In Judas, we see the danger of despair, a cautionary tale about what happens when we believe our mistakes are beyond redemption. His final act, turning away from forgiveness, stands as a sobering reminder that grace is always available, even in our darkest moments. What might his story have looked like if he had sought reconciliation instead of surrendering to hopelessness? Would history remember him differently if he had turned back toward Jesus and accepted the mercy he so desperately needed? The legacy of Judas forces us to grapple with profound spiritual truths. Is there a limit to God's forgiveness? How do we respond to our own failures? And do we allow guilt to consume us? or do we turn back toward grace? These questions aren't just about Judas, they're about us. Every choice we make, every moment of doubt, mirrors a fragment of his journey. In his story, we are reminded of the importance of seeking forgiveness and the courage it takes to believe in second chances. As you reflect on this story, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Was Judas a doomed figure, or is there more to his narrative than meets the eye? Do you believe his betrayal was a moment of weakness, or was it a part of something greater that we might not yet fully understand? Leave your insights in the comments, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more thought-provoking explorations of Bible stories. Together, we'll uncover the layers of these timeless narratives and find meaning in their lessons for our lives today. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the Bible's most complex and challenging figures. Let's continue to seek the lessons hidden in the stories of faith, hope, and redemption.